You look at songs like Sugar, which is, pretty heavy. Spider's a little bit more the ballad thing. I mean, do you think that you were still sort of finding yourself as a lyricist and a singer on that first record? I mean, do you think, you had developed who you were as an artist at that point?
It's like development is, there's beginning and there's no end, right? You start somewhere and you keep on going. I'm still developing what I do, and if I was to look at my own self at that time within the band system and the stuff that I was doing, it was very experimental, very interesting, and heavy and a lot of kind of angst within the expression.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, every record that you make, you evolve, you learn stuff from, and you change. You change in life. I was in my late 20s, and I'm in my mid-40s, I've made a bunch of records in the middle, and I'll keep on making a bunch of records. Not just records, but music. Records are getting outdated.
Yeah.
So, I love composing. At the time, when I was doing system stuff, my compositions, I'm not talking about lyrics, but I'm talking about actual music compositions, were fairly rudimentary. And now I feel like, they're pretty wide. I can pretty much do anything I want to do. I could make a rock record, a jazz record, an electronic record, write a symphony, write scores, melt all of them into one if I want to. It's like the experience that I'm getting making all these records has really given me a palette like no other that I can do pretty much anything music.
Interesting, yeah. I mean, Serj. I mean, you talk about the system stuff. I mean, if you look at sort of that last system record, Hypnotize. I mean, do you think that the like you as a writer? I mean, do you think it had expanded by then from what you'd kind of done on that first record? I mean, there was kind of the actual title track and Kill Rock and Roll, which is kind of a pretty crazy thing. Vicinity of Obscenity, which is kind of a crazy kind of a thing. I mean, do you think that you were sort of trying to stretch the boundaries a little bit, and then ultimately maybe you stretched them so far that ultimately that's why you ultimately wanted to go on and pursue a solo career? I mean, could you sort of sense that kind of a thing happening, wanting to experiment in these different areas?
It's kind of interesting that you're looking for reasons for someone to do a solo record, but in reality, it's the other way around. We should always be looking for reasons for someone to collaborate. In other words, everyone starts out as a solo artist. If you can't play an instrument or carry your tune, no one will want you in a band, right?
Right.
So it's kind of like the other way around. I was always going to do my solo stuff, irrespective of what system did or didn't do.
Oh, I see.
I like creating all kinds of music, and not just experimenting, but even rock music. Harakiri is a rock record, not just so similar from what system may have done. So, it's not necessarily all orchestral and jazz and other genres, but it's all the same to me, man. It's just music, and I like doing it in many forms with many people and alone.
Gotcha, Serj. I'm sorry.
Believe me, I'm very thankful. My previous phone call, I couldn't understand him at all. He was on the phone, so.
Oh man, that's so much better. Thank you. Yeah. You bring up some really interesting points, Serj. In 2006.
I told you sound like Lars.
I'm sorry. Say it again.
Has anyone told you that you sound like Lars from Metallica on the phone?
No, I've never heard that one.
Yeah. Do you have Danish background?
Well, I have Jewish and Russian. I don't know if that counts.
Maybe Jewish and Russian together make it Danish.
Exactly.
But you actually sound like Lars on the anyway.
That is so funny, man. No, very funny. System broke up in 2006, and you went out and did the Elected Dead record. I mean, were those songs that you had? I'm sorry?
System took an indefinite hiatus in 2006.
Hiatus. Forgive me. When they took the hiatus, I mean,
No worries.
were
So it's all good.
yeah, I mean, were those sort of ideas that you had been collecting along the way, Serj? I mean, were these things that you wanted to try with System, and just you been hanging on to them? Just wondering, where did sort of those songs for that first record come from?
That's a good question. It's a really good question that no one's asked me in the last 5 years, actually.
Huh.
That's really good, bro.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to think. There are no songs. I don't think there's any songs on Elected Dead that I've ever tried with System. I think they were all written, for the solo record. But I was working on them while I was doing the last. I remember recording on the bus while we were doing the Ozfest in 2006 with System.
Oh, really?
So I had a lot of those songs, the original versions, at least on acoustic guitar and piano, written by 2005, well, not 2005, but definitely 2006, I would say. So I was working all that. And some of it I may have written after, but yeah, because I put it out in late 2007, toured for it in 2008. Yeah, that makes sense.
Interesting. So, I mean, Serj, did you approach sort of that first solo record in the same way that you did the System stuff? In other words, you've been working with this band, you've been recording vocals, you've been writing, the recording process. I mean, did you sort of take that and apply it to the solo thing, or was it, no, this is going to be different. I'm going to engineer, produce, and write, and do the whole thing, and I'm going to try to, take a different approach to the music?
It's kind of like if you were writing an article with 3 other people and an editor, versus you writing the article yourself, it's never going to be the same, obviously.
I see.
But the approach I took was quite different because when you're not working with a band, you're doing everything yourself, obviously. And, when you're working with System, we would write we would write on our own, bring it to the rehearsal studio, collaborate with each other, work everything out so that it's played really well live, and then go record. Whereas working on my own, I would start from scratch and start recording immediately. Start from the guitar track or piano track, whatever was the first instrument I wrote on, and start building it up from there. And the drums are, in a live recording situation, as we would do with System, the drums are the first thing you record.
I see.
The way that I did it with Elected Dead, the drums are the last thing I recorded. Because I had these drum loops I was using to temp everything, and then replaced a lot of the temp drum tracks with live drums. Not everything. Sky is Over, for example, is still electronically done, and no one knows that, which is really cool. So, it's a whole, it's kind of like writing a rock record without a rock band. That was what I learned doing Elected Dead and producing it myself and engineering a good part of it myself as well. So with each record you learn something new. With Imperfect Harmonies, with the Elected Dead Symphony, I learned how to write for an orchestra. With Elected Dead, with Imperfect Harmonies, I learned how to make a fusion record of a sound I've never heard before, using orchestra, rock elements, as well as electronic elements. And with Harakiri, I guess, I've just wrote like the most upbeat punk record I've ever written in some ways, So with each record, I think you learn something else.
Really interesting. Which brings us to the new record, Serj. You describe it as kind of up-tempo punk stuff, and certainly there are like kind of like little moments, maybe rhythmically that would sort of suggest punk stuff, but the music seems. Maybe like uneducated democracy. We get kind of that little fast kind of a punk groove on there. But really, the music sounds, sounds a little bit. Well, it sounds a lot more sort of arranged and kind of, orchestrated than kind of punk stuff. But it's just so interesting that you would describe it as kind of up-tempo punk rock. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't necessarily think it's a punk record, but you're right. You're absolutely right. It's a rock record, but and it has different tempos. There's mid-tempo songs. There are more of the kind of melodic anthem-y songs, and there's more of the heavy like uneducated democracy and figure it out, or more of the heavier kind of metal-y kind of stuff. But more of a. I guess what I'm trying to say is Elected Dead was a rock record with progressive elements, but and I think Harakiri has some of those elements, but it also has a more upbeat kind of vibe to it that Electric Dead didn't have, I guess. It's a little more in your face at some moments, I've noticed with Harakiri. A little more urgent in terms of its message than Electric Dead was.
Interesting, and I also read that you would actually use like the iPad to kind of sketch out ideas in attempting to sort of approach the record in a new way and sort of bring in different textures and things. I mean, was that a real tool for you?
When I got the iPad, I got all these music programs. They make these amazing music applications for it, and started playing around with them. And there's some really cool synths and beatboxes and all sorts of stuff. So I was playing around just for fun because it's fun. And sketching three of the songs, some of the more ethno-electro kind of songs from it. Like you'll know the different, like Reality TV and King Chime and Deafening Silence. I've sketched originally on the iPad and
Interesting.
Put it in Pro Tools and worked them with live instruments, etc. I also did a lot of like kind of decomposition stuff with this record, which is I would take stuff from my first two records, break them into loops, and use them just to temp up and create stuff on the fly on the screen, and just go, oh, all right, this looks like a good arrangement. Let's switch it this way. Oh, okay, that looks good, and then replace some of it with live instrumentation or scratch it all and record it live. Like in other words, I used fun little musical recycling tools to kind of trick myself into writing in different ways than I had previously. As a songwriter, that with the propensity and desire to always progress and change, I welcome the opportunity to write with instruments I've never written with, or in ways to arrange that I've never arranged them.
Oh, that's so cool, man. Figure It Out is the first single. Has kind of that crazy, wonderful kind of that spoken kind of double time thing in there in that verse, that vocal thing, and that great little bass breakdown. Wonderful wah solos. Serj, I mean, I know that you're working with the FCC band. I mean, is that a totally different experience for you working with those guys as opposed to the system guys? I mean, when you were looking for sort of guitar players and bass players and drummers, I mean, were you looking for, musicians that sort of, played like Darren, Chavo, and John? Were you looking for people that didn't play like that? I'm just wondering, what attracted you to these guys, and what were you looking for, sort of in your band, your backing musicians that would record with you as well?
When you write a solo record, you have to look for artists that play that material well. You're not comparing to previous players you've played with. You're not comparing it. You're not trying. I wasn't comparing them to any of our players. I was trying to find people that played the material that I wrote for Electric Dead really well.
I see.
And that's what I found in the FCC guys. And, every player is different, obviously. You can't really compare musicians. Everyone has their own style and way of playing. But they've become my band, We've toured together for the last 5 years. So System's my band. They're also my band. And I've also played with 12 orchestras in Europe that are my band that I would love to play with again. And so my band is the world now.
I gotcha. You had mentioned Ching Chime, Serj, which I thought was just an unbelievable song, man. I really love that song.
Cool. I'm glad you liked it.
Oh, it's so great, man. It starts with that cool little, an ethnic kind of an instrument. I'm not sure what that was, but it was very cool.
An oud.
Oh, it was an oud. I'm sorry, man. I should have known that.
No. Why would you?
Well, I mean, I sort of have a little, understanding of some of those instruments, but the oud I should have known. That was such a great sounding instrument. There's kind of a Middle Eastern, kind of a vibe, a sense of that. I mean, Serj, was your upbringing, sort of an influence on your songwriting in terms of, listening, what I'm guessing to like, Lebanese, songs, folk songs, which tend to sound like Israeli, or that there's just those sort of those those melodies that kind of you hear in those kinds of those ethnic music. I'm just wondering, do you think that carried over for you into your songwriting in terms of when you were searching for melodies or that type of thing? Was it ever did it ever influence your writing at all?
absolutely. Everything I've listened to influences my writing from Armenian music, which is vastly different than Middle Eastern music, to Middle Eastern music, to European music. I grew up mostly on, that kind of music, Greek music.
Right.
When I was really, really young, before coming to the States, and I was 7 years old, I guess, when we came here. And when we came here, I was listening to, disco and ABBA and a lot of early soul music. And then in the 80s, obviously listening to, kind of like more the new wave and goth and that kind of vibe. So it's not until like late 80s, early 90s that I really, really got into rock, metal, punk, hip hop, and some of the stuff all that stuff was kind of percolating at the time, especially with hip hop at the time being a later genre, I guess. So I'm influenced by all of it. I listen to a lot of jazz. I listen to a lot of soundtrack type of music, a lot of scores, and everything influences me. But I'm also influenced by the wind. I'm influenced by conversation. I'm influenced by birds. I'm influenced by all of nature, theoretical ideas, and everything's an influence. Everything's fair game.
Yeah, it's so interesting, man. You mentioned "Deafening Silence" earlier as well, Serj, which is just a wonderful song, kind of that haunting kind of a ballad thing. Um, the mix of kind of those keyboard parts and again those nylon string instruments. Serj, are you always kind of looking for different combinations of instruments? Playing the acoustic instruments against like the keyboard things and looking for different kinds of patches and sounds and stuff that will kind of complement the more organic kinds of instruments.
Absolutely, yeah. It's great when everything just kind of. I mean, sometimes you end up doing a lot of EQing and things to jive well together, obviously. But it's great to mix different elements together, analog instruments, traditional instruments with more electronic stuff and beats with live, rhythmical elements. And, that song in particular makes me think of that really cool guitar line with the Murph pedal, the Moog Murph pedal on it. It's a great, it's my favorite delay pedal, and I love that kind of vibe. Yeah.
Interesting. Serge, can you talk about how a track like that gets built? I mean, is it some kind of a beat you have, and then putting down a keyboard pad, or I mean,
I started with a sample and a beat. Yeah, and I sketched it out on the iPad first, and then kind of added live instruments, broke it down, remixed it, added live elements, added drums in the chorus. Did we even add drums in the chorus, live drums? I don't even remember if we did. Might be all beats for that song, I think.
Wow.
That was the only one that I think we didn't, yeah.
So, Serge, as the engineer and producer and the artist and songwriter, can you divorce yourself as Serj Tankian artist versus Serj Tankian producer? You've done this performance of this song "Deafening Silence," and this guys out in the studio singing this vocal, and then you have to come back and into the producer's chair and hear that and know if it's happening or not. Is that something that you've learned to do over the course of your solo records, or is that something do you need other input to kind of know when a performance is working or when it might not be working?
Yeah, it's a really good question. When you're producing everything yourself and wearing all the hats, it's sometimes it's difficult to be impartial.
Yeah.
And which is why it's really important to have other people to listen to the music. Musician friends, other producers. I played music to producer friends. I do that with every record and get their 2 cents along the way.
Oh, I see.
Whenever I can, obviously. Just to kind of have a different outlook, different ear, and I play it for musician friends. I play it for kids. The most honest audience of music are 11-year-olds and under.
Yeah, you're right.
Friends' kids, cousins' kids come over, and you're playing it for them, and then you watch the kids' reaction, and then I'll ask them, I'm like, what do you think about this song? And their reaction is usually the best fucking, most interesting reaction that you would get from anyone listening to the music, because they have no fear of repercussions as far as their honesty, and they have a very close connection to the music because of their intuitive nature, more so than adults do. Adults will get kind of heady with it and, start thinking about it too much. And the kid will go, oh, I like this because of this. And you're like, of course. That's the fucking strength of the song.
Yeah.
It's like genius,
Yeah. No, you're exactly right.
All producers should be under 11, I think. It's really starting to get trend.
Interesting. The title track, Serj, a really beautiful song, that great kind of that descending chord sequence you were doing, that wonderful vocal melody. I believe that song was sort of about kind of the animals of the world and the things that are happening to them. I mean, as you were writing the song, Serj, I mean, I'm sorry? Yeah, I mean, did you know that? I mean, did you know that this song was going to be sort of about animals and what they were going through? And if you did, I mean, were you sort of trying to create music to sort of relate those feelings in a musical fashion in terms of what you were kind of saying lyrically? I mean, the sounds of instruments, or instruments sounding maybe more plaintive, or that kind of thing. I mean, did you ever think along those kinds of lines? Trying to complement a vocal with the actual sounds of the instruments.
What's interesting about the title track Harakiri is I wrote it in early January 2011 at the ominous site of mass species death, which is why I called it Harakiri. There were about 1 million birds and fish that died between the first week of January 2011 to like 3 weeks from then, and that was like a month and a half before the Japanese nuclear disaster and whatnot. I just found the event, because it was happening all over the world at the same time, and all the scientific explanations that were given were pretty bunk. I found the event to be very, very ominous and very powerful, almost biblical, if you will. There's still no particular scientific explanation why 20,000 blackbirds died in Arkansas that day, or 500,000 crab washed up in Maryland the week after that, or 100,000 sardines washed up in Redondo Beach, California 2 weeks after that. Like, they each have separate little scientific explanations. None of it, it's like someone, they're not acceptable. They're dumb explanations. So it was such an ominous event that I found it very symbolic. I started thinking, why would species that were so inherently close-knit within nature, that have early warning systems way more developed than ours in terms of environmental changes and disasters and earthquakes and tsunamis, why would they decide to go? What made them go? What symbol made them go? What does that mean for environmental degradation? What does that mean for humanity? It's those questions that led me to write Harakiri.
Interesting. Serj,
so in the end, also, I use Harakiri as a symbolism for our own poisoning of our environment and our own kind of unconscious suicide.
Gotcha. And I mean, with the upcoming election, and I don't want to make this about politics, but certainly you must have feelings about it. I mean, where do you think things are headed? I mean, are things going to get better, or
simplifying the issue of better or worse is it's not really going to be it's not really going to solve everything. I think when it comes to the U.S. elections, instead of looking for the elections to design our lives, we should design our lives so that our elections reflect it correctly. In other words, it doesn't start and end with the president, it starts and ends with us. And so that's very important to note. I believe that we should become a smarter democracy, because with a smarter democracy, we're less likely to be led blindly down some dark alley by anybody or any interest, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, we've got the top military in the country. We've got the top economic system in the country. Let's have the top educational system to match. You know, um, so you know, and I think those things are very important. Hello?
Oh yeah, I'm so.
Oh, okay. Because Stacy's calling me on the other line.
Oh, they are?
Just doesn't interrupt. Yeah, hold on one second.
Oh, gotcha. Just a couple more minutes, Serj. I just want to ask you about some of your other projects here, real quickly. The Fucktronic project with Jimmy Urine. I mean, that was pretty interesting. I mean, where did that come from, Serj? I mean, what made you want to get involved in that?
I was having sushi with Jimmy. We're friends, and we both are fans of British gangster films. So we put each of our electronic tracks together, get a bunch of friends to do voiceovers that also like British gangster films, and came up with Fucktronic. It's like a British gangster film, and now we're getting interest by different people to do like visuals for it. Any different ideas that are coming to the table that are really interesting that we're trying to implement before we release the project.
That's so cool, man. Orca is kind of your first kind of real symphony that you've written?
Correct. Orca is my first real symphony. Because Elected Dead Symphony is more like the Elected Dead record in symphonic form. It's really, you know, a rock record but done with an orchestra, but this is a real symphony. There's no vocals. It's an actual symphony. And it's a really interesting symphony that kind of fuses early 20th century kind of composition influences with a lot of soundtrack and score, film scoring influences.
That's so cool. So, Serj, I mean, you've just always kind of loved the sound of classical orchestras and violins and oboes and stuff. I mean, that's always just been part of your makeup.
I didn't always love it, no. I didn't grow up on classical music. I've never been trained on classical music. But it's something that, you know, watching films, I really started appreciating the emotional content that was delivered by the musical side of films, using the orchestra and the dynamics of an orchestra, which are far wider than anything you can get out of for electronic instruments or for, you know, amps or whatever. The dynamics of an orchestra are pretty incredible. So I became influenced by that, and the experience of working with the Auckland Philharmonia Orchestra and doing Elected Dead Symphony really kind of opened my palette to many more, you know, colors of being able to compose for anything. Now I can compose for orchestra, I can compose with a jazz record, I can compose electronic and rock. Rock is a no-brainer. any form, you know, acoustic stuff, whatever. It doesn't matter. I mix them all, fuse them all. I've got, you know, I can pretty much do it. You know, the difference between, I guess, coming back to one of your original questions, the difference between Serj in the self-titled System of a Down record and now is that I have the confidence and the tools and skills to pretty much write any type of music that I can even imagine.
That's so interesting, Serj. Jazz is Christ is sort of your foray into kind of like the jazz thing. You're mixing kind of electronic and more traditional jazz elements.
Correct. It's kind of like a progressive jazz record, and it's got hints of classic jazz, but definitely an experimental side as well. And it's really well done. And I worked with three amazing jazz musicians. One of them is this guy named Tigran Hamasyan. He's on Verve Records.
Right.
He's a phenomenal pianist. The other guy is Valery Tolstov on flute, and the third is Tom Dupree on trumpet, who I worked with on Prometheus Bound, the musical. He was part of the Prometheus Bound band. Incredible jazz musicians, and it was a pleasure working with them and putting it together. Yeah, we're looking for the right distributor to work through and put it out whenever, you know, we're done with Harakiri. We've got all these art projects waiting down the stream, basically.
Yeah, that's so cool. You bring up the Prometheus Bound rock musical. What was that experience like, Serj? I mean, I'm guessing writing a rock musical is different than writing a rock solo record.
Absolutely, it was an incredible experience, man. I learned a lot about composing for theater, and working with some incredibly creative people. Stephen Sater, who prior to Prometheus Bound had done Spring Awakening and won 8 Tony Awards.
Wow.
And Diane Paulus, who was our director, who had done Hair in New York, and all these amazing musicals and theatrical performances, who was the in-house director for the American Repertory Theater. So we did our musical at Harvard over on Theater on Mass Avenue, and it ran for 5 weeks. Now we're trying to kind of bring it into New York and trying to restart it up there next year.
That is so cool. And you recently came out with a second book of poetry, Glaring Through Oblivion, as a follow-up to Cool Gardens, and I was looking at some of that stuff. Man, it was so cool. I mean, were you a reader of poetry back in the day, Serj?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Growing up, I really enjoyed the kind of expressive, limitless expression of poetry that I found very moving. So I would write, growing up, and so I have thousands and thousands of compiled poems, and about 10 years ago I put out Cool Gardens, my first poetry book, and it's done really well for a poetry book. And so last year I was tempted to do it again. I thought I would never do another poetry book, but I decided to just do. I decided to do more of a coffee table style book this time with my friend's artwork, Roger Kukalian, who's worked on Lord of the Rings and a bunch of films.
Wow.
Phenomenal digital painter. And so we put out more of like a really beautiful art book with poetry. So it's not so much the same as, Cool Gardens in that sense. And,
That's so cool. I mean, so is there a fine line between a good poem and a corny one?
Oh, it's eternity between a good poem and a corny one.
Yeah, and lastly, Serj, and I'm sure you've been asked before, but just do you think that you might get back together with the system guys to perhaps do another record?
Well, we're getting together to do some shows on the East Coast in August. We've got a few festivals in Canada, Toronto, Montreal, as well as a bunch of shows on the East Coast. And right now I'm quite busy with Harakiri. I'm going to be working on that with the FCC and touring with the FCC till the end of this year and a good part of next year. So, and then I got all these other projects down the line. So it's not going to be for a while, I'm sure, but when it's the right time, we'll get together and do something definitely as far as another record.
Gotcha. And when you did get back together with them, sort of for the download festivals and sort of that time period, I mean, it felt good, sort of, being back with those guys and playing live again. I mean, it felt comfortable and.
Oh man, it was a blast.
It was.
Having a great time. Yeah. I mean, everyone's telling us we sound better than we ever did, and I agree. Like, I think as far as tightness on stage and professionality, and it's fucking on. It's spot on. Like, so I don't know what the 6 years did, but it made us better. That's for sure.
Well, I think you just describing all the things you've been doing, from electronica to jazz to soundtracks to classical, and singing your own stuff and engineering and producing. Certainly, those you're going to bring those elements back to the band, and
yeah, same with the other guys too. Kind of just growing as artists,
Exactly. Well, Serj, thank you so much, man. That was great. I love the record. You're obviously this unbelievably A-type driven personality, which is it's just so cool. I mean, obviously you love doing all these things and being creative with everything you touch, and it was great speaking to you again.
That was a really great interview. Very, very complete. I really appreciate that. No, it was awesome, man. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Serj. You take care of yourself, okay?
Okay, you too. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you.
Night.
Thank you. Bye.